My brother convinced our parents that I was mentally unstable just to inherit the family business. He had me institutionalized, saying, "I'm doing this for your own good." I was locked away while he took everything I worked for. When I escaped and proved his manipulation, he lost his freedom. And our parents lost both of their sons. I remember the exact moment I realized my life had been stolen from me. The stale air of the psychiatric facility clung to my skin, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as a nurse placed a paper cup of pills in my hand. I stared at them, unblinking. I wasn't sick. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't dangerous. But according to the world outside these walls, I was all of those things. And my brother was the one who put me here. The family business, my brother, Kyle, had always been our parents' favorite. Not in an obvious way, but in the way that mattered. I was the responsible one, the one who worked late nights at our family's construction company, the one who knew every contract, every client, every damn screw in the warehouse. But Kyle? Kyle was charming. A smooth talker, a natural liar. Our father started the business from nothing, and by the time I was in my 20s, I was running most of it. Kyle, of course, had a position, but only because of his last name. He was never interested in the work. He liked the money, the respect, the power that came with it. But he didn't want to do the hard part. For years, I ignored the signs. I ignored the way he slithered into our parents' good graces, how he spoke about me when he thought I wasn't listening. I ignored the way our father started questioning my decisions, how my mother would tilt her head and ask, "Are you sleeping enough, honey?" Like I was some fragile thing about to shatter. I should have seen it coming. The setup, Kyle knew he couldn't just take the company. Our father still respected me too much for that. But he could make me give it up. And that's exactly what he did. It started small. Documents I'd signed would suddenly go missing. Orders I never placed were somehow approved under my name. Clients started receiving emails from me that I had never written. At first, I thought it was just bad luck. Then, I thought I was losing my mind. And that's exactly what Kyle wanted. He started planting seeds of doubt everywhere. He'd make comments at work, loud enough for others to hear. "Man, Alex has been forgetting a lot lately. Stress, maybe?" At family dinners, he'd steer the conversation toward mental health, his voice full of fake concern. "I just worry about him, you know? He works so much. I don't think he sleeps. The pressure of the business, it's getting to him." Our mother, ever the worrier, started hovering. She'd call me at odd hours, asking if I was okay, if I needed help. Our father, a man who had never doubted me before, started second-guessing my choices at work. And then, the incidents began. My car keys would disappear, only to be found in the fridge. My work laptop was found in a dumpster behind the office. One night, I woke up to find my apartment door wide open, even though I knew I had locked it. Kyle was making me look unstable. And it was working. The breaking point, the day it all fell apart, I had been called to an emergency meeting with my parents. I walked into their house, exhausted and frustrated, only to find Kyle already there, sitting beside them, his face full of pity. "Alex," my father began, his voice heavy. "We need to talk about your health." I stared at them, confused. "What?" My mother's eyes were red. She had been crying. "Sweetheart, we know you're struggling. And it's okay. But you need help." Kyle placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, like the dutiful son he pretended to be. "We're just worried about you, man. You've been acting different." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. "Are you kidding me? You actually believe this?" But they did. Kyle had spent months building his case. He pulled out fake emails I had sent, invoices with errors I had approved, security footage of me standing outside my own office at 2 a.m., looking confused, because he had stolen my key card and locked me out. And then he said the words that changed everything. "I'm doing this for your own good." I didn't even have time to fight back. They had already arranged everything. The doctors, the paperwork, the facility. Within hours, I was in the back of a car, escorted to a psychiatric hospital, committed under the guise of self-harm concerns. I wasn't crazy. But by the time they were done with me, I was starting to feel like I was. Locked away days turned into weeks. My protests meant nothing. Every time I argued, it only proved I was delusional. The more I tried to explain, the more they believed I was spiraling. My own parents refused to see me. My calls were ignored. And Kyle? Kyle took everything. He took my position at the company. He had my name removed from legal documents. He convinced our father that I was too sick to handle responsibilities and gained full control. I had lost everything. But Kyle had made one mistake. He thought I would stay locked away. He thought I would stay quiet. He was wrong. Kyle thought he had won. He thought I'd disappear into that place, drugged up and forgotten, while he walked away with everything I built. But he underestimated one thing. I don't break that easily. A dangerous game at first, I played along. It was the only way. I learned fast that fighting back would get me nowhere. Every time I protested, the doctors would write things down. Every time I said I didn't belong here, they'd nod like they were expecting me to say that. Arguing only made me look worse. So, I changed my strategy. I took the pills without complaint, even though I barely swallowed them. I sat through therapy sessions, nodding at the right moments. I pretended to have realizations about my supposed condition. And slowly, the grip they had on me started to loosen. I gained small privileges, a little more time outside, access to the communal phone. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And then, I got lucky. One of the orderlies, Mason, wasn't like the others. He was young, maybe early 20s, and didn't treat me like I was insane. One night, when he was making his rounds, I asked him a question. How long have I been here? He glanced at his clipboard. Almost 4 months. 4 months. 4 months locked away while Kyle ran my business, lived my life. I kept my voice steady. Can you look something up for me? Just on your phone. I need to know what's happening with my family. He hesitated. Dude, I could get fired for that. I nodded, pretending to accept it. But I saw the way he looked at me, the doubt in his eyes, the tiny crack in the story he'd been told. And later that night, he slid a folded napkin under my door. A name, a number, and a single word. Call. The first contact the next morning, I made my move. There was a pay phone in the courtyard. Patients were allowed supervised calls to approved contacts. But Mason? He had quietly not removed the lock on mine. I dialed the number. It rang twice before a voice answered. Hello? I froze. It was a woman. I had no idea who I was calling. I think someone gave me the wrong number, I said, ready to hang up. But then she said, Are you Alex? My heart nearly stopped. Yes, she exhaled sharply. My name's Hannah. I work at your company. I've been trying to find you for months. I gripped the receiver. What the hell is going on? And then she told me. Kyle's lies were falling apart. Kyle had taken full control of the company, but he was running it into the ground. Employees were quitting. Clients were pulling out. He was making decisions that made no sense. Reckless deals, weird financial movements. And the worst part? He was using my name to do it. I was listed as a co-signer on massive financial decisions. My forged signature was on documents that could ruin everything our father had built. And now, people were asking questions. Where's Alex? Why hasn't he been seen? Why is he only communicating through email? Kyle was covering his tracks, but cracks were forming. And Hannah? She was smart enough to realize something wasn't right. I knew you wouldn't just disappear, she whispered. But your family, she hesitated. Your parents, they think you're sick. Your mom's been telling everyone you're still getting treatment. I swallowed the anger rising in my throat. Hannah, I need proof. Something that shows I was locked away against my will. Something that shows Kyle has been forging my name. She hesitated. That's not going to be easy. I don't care. My voice was cold now. Find something. Anything. And get it to me. She promised she would. And then she hung up. Kyle makes his next move 2 days later. Mason slipped another note under my door. Your brother's coming. Be ready. I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe he was coming to gloat, to see me drugged up and broken. Maybe he wanted to make sure I was still locked away, still helpless. But I was ready for him. When Kyle walked into that visiting room, he looked exactly the same, sharp suit, perfect smile, fake concern in his eyes. But I wasn't the same. I didn't speak first. I let the silence hang, let him squirm under my stare. Finally, he sighed, shaking his head. Alex, how are you feeling? I gave him a small smile. Oh, just trying to get better. Like you wanted. He frowned, like he wasn't sure if I was mocking him. I know this has been hard, he said, leaning forward. But you have to trust me. This was the right decision. I tilted my head. Was forging my signature the right decision too? His expression barely changed, but I saw the slight twitch in his jaw. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned in, lowering my voice. I know everything, Kyle. The fake emails. The stolen keycard. The financial fraud. You should have been smarter. His mask slipped. Just for a second. And in that moment, I saw fear. But then he laughed. Actually laughed. Alex, you've always been paranoid. That's why you're in here. He spread his hands, all fake sympathy. Even if you did have proof, who would believe you? Our parents? The doctors? The board? He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. You have nothing. I met his gaze, and for the first time in my life, I smiled at him the way he always smiled at me. Cold. Empty. Dangerous. Not yet. Kyle's smirk faltered. Because he knew. I was getting out. And when I did, he was going to lose everything. The tables start to turn. Kyle walked out of that visiting room with his usual smugness, but I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He thought he had buried me. He thought I had no way out. But the moment he realized I knew about his fraud, that shook him. And I wasn't done yet. The treatment intensifies 2 days later. The facility changed my medication. For months, I had been pretending to take my pills, pocketing them when no one was looking. But suddenly, the staff was watching me closer. The new nurse crushed them into my food. If I refused to eat, they injected me with something instead. Kyle had pulled strings. He knew I was getting stronger, so he was trying to shut me up the only way he could, by turning me into a real patient. I felt the drugs dulling my mind. My thoughts were slower, my body heavy. I struggled to stay awake, struggled to think. But I held on to one thing. Hannah. She was still out there, still digging. And she didn't disappoint. The first break in the case, a week after my meeting with Kyle, Mason slipped another note under my door. This time, it wasn't just a phone number. It was a name. James Carter, private investigator. Call ASAP. I forced myself through the fog in my head and made my way to the payphone again. The call was short. Carter was blunt, to the point. Hannah had hired him with her own money. She had found things, real things. Kyle had been laundering money. It wasn't just mismanagement. It wasn't just incompetence. He was running illegal side deals, funneling company funds into private accounts. And he had been doing it under my name. That changed everything. This wasn't just about taking back my life. This was about sending Kyle to prison. An unexpected ally. The next day, something even stranger happened. I had a new visitor. But it wasn't Kyle. It was my father. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, tired, guilty. His hands shook as he sat across from me. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he said, "Son, did we make a mistake?" I kept my face blank. "What do you mean?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Kyle says you're still unstable. But something doesn't feel right." He looked me in the eyes. "Tell me the truth. Are you sick?" For the first time in months, I saw a crack in his certainty. I leaned forward. "Dad, listen to me carefully. I was never sick. Kyle did this. He set me up." I took a breath, steadying myself. "And now, he's destroying your company." He frowned. "Kyle's running things just fine." "No," I said sharply. "He's stealing from you." I took a risk and dropped the name. Hannah found proof. She hired a private investigator. "Kyle's been moving company money into his own accounts. If you don't believe me, check the financials yourself." He hesitated. I could see the war in his mind. He wanted to believe Kyle. But doubt had taken root. And then I went for the kill. "Why do you think Kyle didn't want you visiting me?" I asked quietly. "Why do you think he pushed so hard to keep me in here?" That hit him hard. His face paled. And then he stood up abruptly. "I need to go." I didn't try to stop him. I had done what I needed to do. Kyle panics. 3 days later, everything exploded. Mason woke me up in the middle of the night, shaking my shoulder. "You need to get up. Now." I sat up, still groggy from the drugs. "What's happening?" Mason glanced toward the door. "Your brother's trying to have you moved." My blood went cold. Kyle must have realized our father was looking into things. He knew I was becoming a problem again. And if I was transferred to a higher security facility, no visitors, no phone calls, no way out. I scrambled to my feet. "How much time do I have?" Mason hesitated. "Maybe an hour." I made a decision in that moment. I wasn't going to wait for my father to figure things out. I wasn't going to let Kyle tighten his grip. I was going to get out. Tonight. Mason and I didn't have much time. Kyle was making his final move, trying to have me transferred, buried even deeper in the system where I'd never get out. But he had made a mistake. He had underestimated how much my father had started to doubt him. And now? It was my turn to take everything from him. The escape Mason had been watching the overnight shifts for weeks. He knew which guards were lazy, which ones took long breaks. There was a side door, one that led to a storage area before opening into the back parking lot. The plan was simple. At 2:30 a.m., I slipped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Mason gave me a staff jacket, something that would make me blend in just enough to walk past any cameras. My body was still sluggish from the medication, but adrenaline pushed me forward. We moved fast. Down the hall, past the nurse's station. A few times, we had to stop, duck into an empty room when footsteps approached. But we kept going. Then we reached the door. It was locked. My heart nearly stopped. But Mason was ready. He had swiped a keycard from a distracted security guard earlier that night. He slid it through the reader. Nothing. He swiped it again. Beep. The light turned green. The door clicked open. And just like that, I was free. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the property. A car was waiting. Hannah was in the driver's seat. She barely had time to open the door before I jumped in. Drive. Gathering the proof over the next 2 days, Hannah and I worked nonstop. My father had already started digging into Kyle's financial records, but he didn't have the full picture yet. Hannah and the private investigator, Carter, had gotten their hands on Kyle's personal accounts. The ones he used to funnel stolen money from the business. It was worse than we thought. Kyle hadn't just been laundering money, he had been gambling with it. He was deep in debt, owing hundreds of thousands to people who wouldn't just ask nicely for it back. And he was using the company to cover his tracks. The moment we had the final piece of proof, I made the call. To my father. We need to talk. All of us. The showdown, I told my father to meet me at the company's headquarters. Not at home. Not somewhere private. In the boardroom. Because this wasn't just a family issue anymore. This was a business takedown. The boardroom confrontation. The room was full when I arrived. My father sat at the head of the table, his face hard with unreadable emotions. My mother sat beside him, looking nervous, confused. Around them were key executives, people who had worked under me for years. And at the far end? Kyle. His face went pale when he saw me. What the hell are you doing here? His voice cracked just slightly. I took my time walking to the front of the room. Then I dropped a thick folder onto the table. Hannah stood beside me. We have something to show you all. The room went silent as I started speaking. I laid it all out. The missing money. The fake accounts. The illegal deals. The debts. The fact that Kyle had been using my name to cover his tracks. I watched as my father flipped through the documents, his hands shaking. Kyle shot to his feet. This is bullshit. He turned to our father. You're gonna believe him? A guy who just broke out of a mental hospital. I smiled. Nice try, Kyle. But I was never legally committed. You and Mom tricked Dad into signing a voluntary admission form. Which means I walked out, fair and square. Kyle's face twisted in rage. This is a damn setup. Hannah stepped forward. Then explain this. She clicked the remote in her hand. A projector screen lowered, showing emails, bank statements, and, worst of all, recordings. The private investigator had gotten something I hadn't expected. A conversation between Kyle and a financial contact, discussing the fraud explicitly. I don't care how shady it looks, just get it done. I can't let my idiot brother find out, or I'm screwed. The room went deathly quiet. Then my father slowly turned to Kyle. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched into fists. Kyle, he said, voice dangerously calm, tell me this isn't real. Kyle's mouth opened and closed. He was scrambling. He had nothing. And that's when my mother, who had been silent this whole time, spoke up. You did this. Her voice trembled. You put your brother away? You stole from your own family. Kyle spun toward her, his face desperate now. Mom, I did it for us. For the business. Alex was going to run it into the ground. I had to. My father stood. His voice was cold. Get out. Kyle froze. What? I said get out. My father's face was red with barely contained fury. You're fired. And if you step foot in this building again, I'll have you arrested. Kyle let out a strangled laugh. You can't do this. You need me. We needed Alex, my father shot back. And you took him from us. Kyle's eyes darted around, searching for support. He found none. Then he turned to me. This is what you wanted, huh? His voice was shaking. To humiliate me? To destroy me? I stared at him for a long moment. Then I said, no, Kyle. I just wanted my life back. You destroyed yourself. And just like that, it was over. Security came in and escorted Kyle out. He shouted, threatened, swore he'd fix this. But there was nothing left to fix. Kyle was arrested a week later. The financial crimes were too big to cover up. He took a plea deal, but it still meant years in prison. My father officially reinstated me as the rightful head of the company. But it wasn't the same anymore. My mother tried to reach out. But there was no going back to how things were. And my father? One day, when it was just the two of us in his office, he looked at me and said, I let you down. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I just nodded. I know. We never spoke about it again. Moving on, I got my life back. But at a cost. Kyle was gone. My relationship with my parents was forever fractured. The business survived, but my passion for it never really came back. Still, I walked away with something more important. The knowledge that no matter how deep someone tries to bury you, if you fight hard enough, you can dig your way out. And sometimes, the people who betray you the hardest? They end up burying themselves instead.